All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. I'm joined by a special guest today. We're talking about a bunch of different aspects of Minuteman lifestyle and just kind of going over quite a few things. So, with that, you go ahead and introduce yourself, man.
Hi, I'm gonna go with Crag today just to stay a little undercover, but I am a local here with AJ here.
Yeah, yeah. So we're two local guys up here. This is a buddy of mine who's done some cool stuff in the past, and he's got some good ideas and some good thoughts about kind of the Minuteman community and lifestyle. We're just kind of go through and pick his brain. So I know before we were talking about thoughts on community. So what are your thoughts on the word community when we refer to, the gun community?
I think the word like gun community has been tossed around quite a bit for like the past decade or so, and has been kind of controversial, like as far as like online and kind of in person. I think just because there's so many different levels to it is why.
I agree. I think there's a certain aspect where people see it as community in the sense that like, oh, we're all gun owners and we're all in this together. But we're not really. If you think about it, I mean, like, ideally we'd want to be, but there's so many different levels of this. There's some people who are just casual gun owners. There's some people who, even in just let's narrow it down and say a more Minuteman lifestyle community. There are some people who take it much more seriously than others. There are people who have different levels of degrees of how willing they are to devote time, money, and effort to that kind of lifestyle, or how far that lifestyle goes for them. And sometimes that can lead to kind of interpersonal conflicts or issues with different groups or different people, to where the idea of community breaks down pretty quickly.
I agree. Um, so many people in this quote unquote community disagree on quite a lot of things that I find, depending on, politics that you follow, religion, or just like what you see the Second Amendment is used for. I know left and right of the political spectrum. Um, there's a lot of similarities as far as like, who's allowed to have guns and who isn't. I know on the left political sphere, they kind of have disagreements as far as, is everyone allowed to have firearms, or is it just their team is allowed to have firearms?
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting question too that we've talked about a little bit before, is this idea of, is the Second Amendment for everyone, or should you advocate the Second Amendment for everyone? And it brings up an interesting idea, that we always talk about, things like, oh, even if people disagree with you, you should be able to fight for their rights. And to a certain extent, I believe that. But at another level, it's like, at a certain extent, at what point are you advocating for the enemy? At a certain point, if you know that someone, for example, let's say radically left, um, would willingly use your advocating for their Second Amendment rights to turn right around and strip you of yours and do harm to you, does that change your ideology? Does that should you consider that as a factor when you're advocating for 2A for everybody? Is there a certain level of responsibility and acceptance of a certain level of freedom that comes with advocating for that right? It brings up an interesting question that I think a lot of people need to answer for themselves, as far as like, where do you stand on that?
Where I would personally stand with it is, I think it's impossible to try and make it to where you have all the tools, but your adversary doesn't. Um, I would feel comfortable with everyone having the opportunity to own firearms as long as they're of sound body and mind, um, and aren't a threat to themselves to say. Uh, but that would have to be proven, right?
When I think the main concern with that too would come down to who's the deciding body there, who decides
Right.
what sound body and mind is. And so I think it's always better to err on the side of freedom in that regard. But it does bring up an interesting question just from a fundamental perspective, in the sense that if like whenever you're advocating for other people, but even those that disagree with you, and there's nothing wrong with that. At what point do you have to have some semblance of shared value, though, to continue to stand up for somebody? For example, if someone's end goal is to use your advocating for them to receive firearms to eventually, strip you of yours, does that change the way in which you do it? I think that's an interesting question for a lot of people that can become pretty complicated pretty quickly. Going back to what we're saying, I think that it just brings up an interesting thing across the board with no matter what fundamental freedom it is, whether it be the Second Amendment, whether it be freedom of religion, whether it be freedom of like whatever it is, right? Um, like you can be an absolutist, nothing wrong with that, and be like, nope, I don't care what the consequences are. There's this, but I think there's also a certain nuance to bring into it to be like, you know, use your head a little bit and say, just because I advocate, I think you can. Let me back up. I think you can separate like advocating for something versus supporting something in the regards that I can say, hey, I believe in everyone's fundamental right to be able to own firearms. However, I also don't believe in a radical left wing agenda. I can say, hey, I believe in everyone's right to own a firearm, but I can also not advocate for people I might see necessarily as a threat or as an enemy to go out and purchase firearms. I might not be able to be like, I might not just go out and be like, I might be like, hey, I fully believe everyone should have the right to own one, but that doesn't mean I'm going to go down to like the local socialist club and be like, hey, you guys should go get guns.
Yeah.
You get what I'm saying?
Um,
You can believe in
yeah. If you
advocating for
try
your
to make compromises, then we all suffer from it.
right.
Um, Another thing I kind of want to go with this is I know there's a lot of people online that want to try and offer their knowledge and services to try and help people in the gun community or prepper community.
Yes.
Um, but at the same time, when you're putting free knowledge out there on the internet, it kind of becomes a double-edged sword, um, depending on what team you're on, I guess. I see a lot of groups that try to flaunt what they got,
Mm-hmm.
but I don't think they really realize just like, you're giving people that might not be your friends like intel on you about what you have or how you do things.
I could definitely see that being a double-edged sword because I think there's, the two sides to that is one, um, a lot of people in the United States today don't necessarily look at Minuteman or, I'll use the M word, militia style activity as normal. And I think part of that is because we've allowed it to become denormalized and we have to normalize it again. So I think sometimes putting all that information out there and putting all that stuff out there to try to grab people into it or to get people who are just kind of coming, just kind of pulling their head out and being like, oh, hey, the world's actually a scary place. How do I start? I think there's a lot of good in that. But yeah, like you said, I think everything with a grain of salt. Um, for example, with certain groups or certain things that you're doing, um, I understand the importance of showing stuff off because there's a certain level of like, hey, look, you're not the only one, or like, hey, people are doing this, and hey, we're doing things. I also understand the operational security aspect of that, saying like, hey, maybe we really don't want to give away the whole farm. Maybe we don't want to tell everybody exactly what we're doing all the time. Let there be a little bit of mystery. Let there be a little bit of something. Like we could put some stuff out that kind of shows people like we're not just talk, but we don't necessarily have to give away everything. So I definitely see the double-edged sword there, especially when you start coming into certain context and certain um, gear, equipment, things like that. I totally understand that aspect of it. So I think there is it's definitely a double-edged sword because you do have a lot of good, but there is the potential for bad. And I think every group kind of has to just will amongst themselves realize and talk like what that balance is.
Yeah. And I'll kind of use Instagram as an example since you and I are both very familiar with it.
Mm-hmm.
My main purpose for having an Instagram account is really just to try and find people. Like I'll try and post things that look cool or just like a little bit of what me and my guys are doing, just to grab some people's attention. They like what they see, then they can, reach out to me or one of my colleagues, and we can go from there. If Instagram itself wasn't such a great tool for recruitment and just finding people, I probably wouldn't even have an account still.
Yeah, I think of a lot of the find your tribe posts that people put out there, which I think the biggest thing, is a lot of people they want to get into stuff like this. They want to get into the training and actually getting into groups, but a lot of people don't really know how. And either they're not connected in their communities, or um, for one reason or another, they just don't have the opportunity to really go out and get connected with people. And so, they try to use social media to find others and like-minded individuals, and that can be a challenge sometimes, especially when you start talking about Minuteman type stuff. It's not always well received, and so no one wants to be that odd guy out in the beginning and make that awkward reach out. So I think um, Instagram's definitely a good tool for finding people. I think I do think that it is a positive, in my opinion, that a lot of people are trying to do knowledge transfer stuff, depending on necessarily what it is. I think there's a lot of people out there that just don't know what they don't know. And I mean, I've even come across some stuff sometimes where I'm like, oh, dang, that's actually a really good idea. I would have thought of that. Like, that's something interesting to see. I'll have to try that. Uh, and so I think there's some positives to it. I think there's a lot of negative, and I think there's a lot of people out there that are doing stuff for hype. I think there's a lot of people too that do give a little too much away whenever they're posting about stuff. But I think it just depends on the level of comfort that you have as a group, or as a people training with what you're doing, to see what you're willing to give away. Some people I know, like some groups, like their privacy a lot more. Nothing wrong with that. If that's the kind of thing that someone's into, then absolutely, there needs to be an understanding that, like, hey, what happens here stays here, kind of thing. And if there's groups that are a little bit more open, that are willing to be more open to the public, then so be it. But again, that comes down to kind of a personal decision, I think, with how that level of trust that you have with each other, and that level of trust you have with your surrounding area.
hmm Now, there are a lot of guys out there on YouTube, Brent being like a great source of information to anyone who watches him. Um, a lot of that isn't anything new or groundbreaking. It's been public information for a while. It's just those that choose to actually exercise that knowledge and actually like learn it. Because watching a YouTube video for 20 minutes, you're not gonna really retain anything.
Right. Part of it I think of is like, you could go watch a video on buddy rushing, or bounding Overwatch, whatever you want to call it, right? I'm up, he sees me, I'm down, leapfrogging. You can watch a video, you can understand the concept, right? You can be like, okay, I get it. He does this, he moves, blah, 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 blah. But until you go out and you actually do it, right? And you do it a lot and you get proficient at it, you're not just going to be like, okay, the apocalypse happened tomorrow. I watched a 20-minute YouTube video. I'm solid. We're good. I can think of a prime example where me and Mike, my co-host, took two guys out that we worked with out to the flat range, and we're just like, hey, try this out, right? We'll be on
hmm
op. You guys will be on the well. You'll be on the left. You'll be on the right. We got some barriers set up. You'll move barrier to barrier. Just trying to get people to communicate was a challenge. I mean, these guys, they were competent shooters. They understood the concept. They knew what to do, but like they wouldn't yell. Like we're shooting, and instead of being like yelling, moving, really loud for everyone to hear, you
hmm
got the guy being like, moving, like that loud, and it's like, It's just
No,
like
no, I get it. I totally get it.
like like neither of these guys had been in a position, to where they really needed to they did a lot of range stuff by themselves, right? Like a lot of drills and build drills and stuff, which great. You've got awesome split times. But you won't even yell to the dude 10 yards away from you, and he can't hear you. And so just like that simple aspect of communication of being like, no, you have to look over and yell, you know, um, that stuff that comes with hands on.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is kind of new to people still. You still see a lot of people kind of stuck back in 2016 where they're wearing plate carriers on a flat range and worrying about their split times. Um, do they know hand signals? Do they know what an LDA or ODA is? Do they know how to treat such like terrains? Like, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
that's probably
that's
not the correct word for it, but
no, I get what you're saying. And that's something I've kind of discussed a little bit about too. And I know I get a lot of flack for it too, which I think is interesting is that I always talk to the gun people in the gun community. I'm like, well, it's people like, oh yeah, well, what are your split times? Like if I post a video of me doing drills or something, and I'm like, I don't care about my splits, dude. Like, I'm not going to be sitting there being like, oh, thank God I've got a 0.8 second split time or something. I'm going to be like, hey, do I have a couple guys that we can actually do this stuff with? I'm way more concerned about your ability to function as a team than I am about your split times. Like I can teach someone to become a better shooter, right? We can spend time on the range to become a better shooter.
Mhm.
That's not necessarily that hard to teach. I can't easily quickly in one range session teach you how to operate as a team and communicate and function on a level that requires working together for an extended period of time to where at certain points your movements don't even need communication. You already know what that guy's going to do because you've done it so many times with the same person. You know that when they zig, you zag, and that comes with time and training. And I think that again, it depends on what your goal is, I think. And I think going back to I talk about community, the goals of different people in the firearms community are different and at different levels. You have people that are more Minuteman and team base oriented. And I think you have more people who are just like, hey, I just want to shoot guns. And it's like, that's cool, but that's just not where my goal is. My goal is to build a community that I know has my back and that I know should something go down, I can depend on. And I
Mhm.
think the level to which you want to take that can vary. Some people are way more intense to it than others. I think that it does require a little bit of a sit down and be like, hey, we need to get serious about this. Like I've been parts of groups that in the past to where when we trained, we were pretty strict on like, hey, you don't have to make it every single time, but we'd like to see you we're going to do this once every 2 weeks, and we'd like to see you to show up at least once every 6 weeks. So we're all on the same level, right? We understand life happens, things get in the way, but also then at the same time, I know some groups get real big into standardization even and getting more. I don't want to use the word paramilitary because that has weird connotations with it,
It
but
sounds cool.
right, but getting to a certain point of being like, hey, we're going to act like a unit, right, and we're going to have similar gear and kit and equipment, and I think that those are positives. I don't think though I think for some groups not everyone's there, and I think that it can come with its own complications as well.
Mhm.
um, as far as hey, if you say for example, if we're doing this, we're all running this item, right? Whether it be a caliber or a specific weapon or anything, right? Um, nothing's being issued. We're all funding this ourselves, right? So that can cause some kind of complications. Or um, one thing
We're
I
all
think I
volunteers.
right, or one thing I'd kind of like to get your thoughts on. Um, I think the one of the main issues when it comes to getting into a group is that at a certain point there is a certain level of trust that has to be earned in the sense of I'll use this as an example. Let's say you and your group right? Not you specifically, but
Yeah.
like just in general, you, right? You as a group are like, hey, um, we decide we want everybody to kind of pitch in a little bit to a group asset, whether that be a pile of ammo or a pile of food, or maybe it's a weapon system, maybe it's medical supplies, maybe whatever, right? At a certain point, there has to be a certain level of trust with the people that you're working with to do that, because you're not bound by the Uniform Code of Military Justice or any type of law, thing like that. Like, you're just bound by agreeing with each other and trusting each other. So, for example, if you say like, "Hey, John is centrally located, so let's put our stash in John's garage." Well, what if John gets a job at another state and has to move, right? Or do you trust John enough to not dip into that stuff? Or, same thing with ammo or things like that. Or what if, for example, you all pitch in and you go wild on it, and everybody pitches in for a 240, you know, everyone's like, hey, we'll cough up money and get a 240 or whatever, right? Badass, but only one person owns it, right? So like, how do you handle that as a group? Certain things like that. I think that's a certain thing that I don't think most groups honestly make it to that point. Um, Without having serious issues ahead of time. And I think a lot of the issues I've seen being a part of different groups do come down to a certain level of trust and a certain level of taking it seriously, to where, there's nothing more annoying than being the only guy in a group that takes it seriously. And there's also nothing more, the opposite of being the only guy who's, willing to have fun. So there
Yeah.
has to be a bit of a balance there, right? But uh, I think for me, like the issues I've mainly come across with groups in the past is that you kind of divide it into three different people, from my experience. And sometimes it can be hard to vet, and sometimes you got to make do with what you got. But the three different people I usually see that wind up getting into groups are, one, the positive side, the people who I would say they want to take it seriously, they want to learn. Um, Maybe they have some background, maybe they don't, but they are a prepared citizen. They want to do right by them and their community and their family. They want to learn. They want to be better prepared. They want to train. They're there for the right reasons. Then you have the first negative guy, and that is the petty warlord. That is the guy who is, this is his time to shine. He has found something that he can have leadership in that requires no leadership experience. And he has asserted himself as, I am going to be the alpha and you will listen to me. And this is how he gets his rocks off for pushing people around. Then the other side of that is the guy who, he looks at this more as like, hey, this is what we do for fun on Saturdays, and then we go grab a pint afterwards, and I'm getting out of the house, and I don't have to deal with the wife. Um, so I think those last two there are the ones I see, unfortunately, the most, and it's really hard to find the people that want to take it seriously. I've ran into a lot of groups before too, as well, where the talk is big. The talk is like, yeah, we should do this, we should do this, we should do this. And you're like, okay, great. Saturday, the 12th at noon, everybody be there. We're going to go do this, you know? And then out of 40 people or 20 people or 10 people or however many you have, like three show up.
Hmm.
And none of the people that showed up were any of the ones that talked big about being there. And you're like, what the hell, man?
Talk is cheap, man. And I have to agree, there are a lot of people out there that seem like they talk pretty big game. Um, but looking into it doesn't really seem like, they're as organized or as professional as they might portray themselves to be. As far as the three different levels of people committed to this sort of lifestyle, you got your guys who are fully committed. They're using all their spare time to uh, better themselves and better prepare their group. Maybe they're setting up classes for their group, or maybe they're working on, a project such as like specialized equipment. Then there are the guys who focus more about, what it is that they're wearing and what they buy. They want to look like tier one operators. They go out to the flat range and they're shooting A zones all day. But none of those guys have like TCCC training. None of them have like stockpiles of food or know how to preserve food or sew or what have you, skills that are outside of just like making holes and stuff. And those guys are kind of the scariest ones because you have a bunch of men who have equipment to do harm. Uh, and if they find themselves in desperate situations and they're not fully prepared for it, you know, especially if they have family, it's like you either fold up or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, I guess.
Right.
Uh,
I mean, I think of that with like the guys who are like, oh, well, whenever things hit south, I'm just gonna, go south. I'm just gonna start raiding,
mhm. And
and
sorry,
go, go ahead.
I was gonna say I see a lot of this in militia groups. Like they mean well in the beginning, but there are so many where if you really dive in, they don't have all their ducks in a row, in my opinion. They don't have the logistics for what it is that they're trying to accomplish. And when you don't have that, or even really a set goal for everyone that they all agree on, that's kind of how you end up with warlords.
I think you bring up a really good point there with both the logistics and the goal, and I want to kind of break that down a little bit because my thing is like one with the logistics side. I think that is the most challenging part. Again, we're all volunteers; nothing's provided. You're bringing all of your own stuff, and that obviously, if you have a group, especially with people at different financial status, um, within that group, it can be kind of challenging sometimes. And I think that the big issue there too is um, that idea that, in my opinion, I think like one of the good things a group can do is setting up necessarily to be like, hey, look, we want people to have like kind of bought in ownership into this to where it's a shared goal and we're all kind of, pitching in a little bit. And the regards to like, hey, you know, maybe once every month we all decide, we set a budget and we're like, hey, can everyone cough up 20 or $50 and we're all going to go buy long-term storage food for this month. And then next month, hey, can everyone go buy some medical items, right? So like, yeah, you have your own stuff that you're getting for you, but this is stuff that's more like logistical for the group, right? Because again, like you said, logistics is a huge part of that, right? um, and I've talked about this before, like on my Instagram a little bit, with the idea of Minuteman logistics in the sense of you you only have as much beans, bullets, and band-aids as you can carry. And if you get into a violent confrontation or some kind of prolonged issue, how are you getting resupplied? You can't just call up the radio and have the helicopter drop off a resupply. It's not the GWAT. You got to figure that out yourself, and you have to have the supplies. First off, you got to figure out how to get them from point A to point B. But first, before that, you have to have the supplies to get from point A to point B. So, um, I've again been a part of groups where it seems like, let's say the group is about 15 people, the same 6 or 7 people are the only ones putting anything into it. And everybody else is kind of getting a free ride off it. And you're like, okay, this is a problem because, for example, God forbid something happen. Now you know that there are only a certain number of people that are actually committed to this and have actually put time, money, and resources into this. And there are other people that are there for the trainings, but they're not putting anything into it. And now they're probably going to want a piece of the pie, though, if things go south. So how do you deal with that situation? Um, it's like, it's not like it's a stranger. Like this person knows already your group. They've been a part of it. They know um, your inner workings. So it can be things like that, I think, need to be considered as well on how your group is planning to function. How do you intend to have group ownership into that? How do you intend to build that sense of trust and that sense of like, hey, we are a unit, which means no one's coming to help us. We got to help ourselves. Let's do that ahead of time.
Mhm. There has to be a vetting process when it comes to this, because going into our third character here is the part timer. someone who isn't fully committed and like only really goes out and trains on dates that are, convenient to them, and their morals might not be exactly lined up with you. They might just be there just to mooch off the group or have like a sense of security, or it really just isn't that important to them. So I think those are the kind of people you kind of need to look out for. Not saying everyone's bad, or it's bad that if your life is chaos and you just don't have time for this, but
yeah, I think that plays in again to like under like knowing how to be honest with yourself and to understand like what it is that you want out of a group and being honest about it. Do you want just a group of like, are you telling yourself you want to be, a Minuteman commando, but reality, you really just want to go shoot guns on the flat range? Like, there's nothing wrong with that. If that's what your vibe is and that's what you want to do, sweet. Be honest about it. Go do that. Like, you can find a group of dudes that can go do flat range stuff. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that at all. If you're a guy though that wants to do that, like you really want to dive into this and you really want to build a tribe and build a community and kind of build a unit as it were, that takes a lot of time. You think about it, for using the military as an example, having been in myself, that is a full-time job. You are doing that 24 hours a day. You are
mhm.
built, you are training, you are spending time with people, you are doing those things and building those relationships on a daily basis, all day, every day, 4 years at 4 years at a time for hours and hours and hours. And you are building those at that time and you're getting paid to do that. None of the extra stuff that you're doing for this are you getting paid to do. It's quite the opposite. It's probably costing you money and it's costing you time, and time with your family. And there are sacrifices that you have to make both monetarily and, maybe you don't get to hang out at home and do that thing you wanted to do with your kids because you're out, doing some training. And obviously, there's a work-life balance and a lot of balance that comes in with that. But there needs to be an understanding that like it is a sacrifice to do some of these things, and that requires some really hard work and some effort. And unfortunately, I think a lot of people, they jump into it and they're like, "We can do this," and then like a couple weeks in, they're like, "Holy crap, this is a lot! I had no idea."
Mhm.
And I think that's again where it comes down to like being honest with the level of where you're at, and if you're not that, if you don't have the time or the capability, or you don't want to put that time and capability in to that yet, that's understandable. Find a group that's on the same level as you, right? Don't try to force yourself into a group. Like if you don't have the time or the commitment or anything like that right now to be like, yeah, I want to go with these dudes who are doing stuff all the time, every day, blah blah blah. Um, don't jump into it because you're going to wind up disappointing yourself, disappointing the other group, burning bridges. It's not going to be good. Like, be honest with yourself and be like, maybe my life is not squared away yet. I need to focus on that first before I dive into this, or find something a little more low key, dip my toes in the water, and build myself up to that point.
I'll go into my group a little bit as far as like personnel attendance. Um, we have had to let people go in the past, usually either because they're not fully committed or lack of attendance, like they just have too much going on, which isn't a bad thing as long as you communicate that, because that's one thing that we ask for is just like, you got something going on, just let us know. But if you're not, keeping people up to date and you're just kind of a ghost, then you'll be warned and you'll be let go. Um, but when you have people that are fully committed, they're learning, they're retaining the knowledge that you're giving them. They show up to training constantly. It is amazing. Like having a group of guys that you don't have to micromanage and they kind of like already know your thought process. They know all the SOPs. Like it is a beautiful sight.
I want to get your thought too on this, diving into more of the idea of an actual community, and if you're comfortable with sharing this at all about your group. Now, I've trained with people who, whether it be because we're geographically separated or our jobs or whatever, that the only time we really get together is during trainings, right? And maybe one or two of us will hang out on the outside, but basically we're only really getting together during trainings. And I definitely felt that that left a lot to be desired. And if you don't mind, with your group, do you guys do you guys hang out outside of trainings? Do you guys, build that sense of community or fellowship outside of training?
Quite a bit, actually, and I'm glad that you actually asked. I think having a fellowship with your members is extremely important because you got to remember, like, the whole point of this is to, um, not be taken advantage of in, the worst situation possible. And like, these are going to be your brothers in arms, correct? Um, a lot of these guys in my group, not that I'm the owner of the group, just FYI. But most of them are my closest friends. Like, I've been to weddings. I guess go to the same church as some of my members. We have barbecues outside of training, like just having family days and getting to know like each other's families, letting the spouses get to know each other, which is great because sometimes they don't always have an opportunity to go out and make friends. So, and they get to do a little of their own training on the side while we go out and be miserable in the woods, such as jarring fruit and learning how to sew and stitch people up, stuff like that.
I think you brought up a really good point there, for two different things, and one of them is like, again, that idea that the idea is you are training with these people not just to become like, oh, I want to go become like a semi-tactical warlord or whatever, right? Like that's not the goal. The goal is to have people that you can trust and to have that sense of community. And the biggest thing I think that you said there with, getting the families together, letting, if you guys got kids, letting the kids play together and getting the wives together, girlfriends, whatever, that makes it a lot easier. A lot of times I'll hear guys, their complaint is like, oh, well, like my wife hates me leaving her at home all the time. Oh, like great. Like if you guys have a bunch of people who are all married, like get the wives together, see if they become friends. Because another key aspect of that too, in my opinion, is if you're planning on like grouping together, should an incident happen and your families don't get along or your wives don't get along, you are going to be miserable through an already miserable situation. That's going to cause all kinds of interpersonal problems. So squash that early and figure that out early and get the families together. On top of that, too, like you said, training, having the families train. I think that's a huge aspect that a lot of people miss. And I actually just talked about this on a live the other day with Taprack Tyler and Sleepwalker Hart and the actual Stacker Actual, um, about training your families, right? That the way I put it was, look, you could be the most squared away Delta Force, whatever, right? You got to sleep at some point. So if
Hmm.
it's just you got to have someone watching your back. And if that someone that's watching your back is your spouse who you've invested zero time in training, you're not going to feel secure and things are going to go south, right? But if you're like, hey, I wanted this to be a family ordeal, like with me and my family, my kids have grown up with me doing this training thing and with, stocking up food and medical supplies and randomly being like, hey, kid, you want to learn how to do a tourniquet, So that's normal for them. Like they're growing up with this. They're seeing that like it's not a weird thing for them. And my wife is getting interested in it too, and training with her, and I think that what you said there is a really good point and should be an example for a lot of people, that are listening. That if you want to get into this, get your families involved in it too. Don't let it be just your thing. Make it a family thing.
Yeah, like your family, or at least like your household, should have an understanding of what it is that you're doing and why you're doing it. Um, Plus, it's like you're not just gonna like leave your wife and kids at home while you go out and fight. Like, oh, it's raining UN people from the sky. I'll be back by dinner.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's one thing too. I harp on a lot on here is like this idea that everyone wants to go be a commando, right? And it's like that's cool. Who's guarding the homestead? You know what I mean? Like just because like Russians are falling from the sky and you're like, all right, boys, let's go LARP in the woods. It's like sick. Do you think your wife and kids are going to do well living on the nuts and berries you're collecting, or do you think that you should probably have a plan and it involve your family?
Exactly. And another thing is, at least I know in my group's case, me and my fiance, we don't have kids ourselves at the moment, but many members of our group do. And I know it's not even a question in our mind in a situation if someone was to get shot and killed, and now their wife, or say the wife dies of sickness, XYZ, and that child needs parents, like there's quite a bit of us that are willing to um, take in that child because war is ugly, and you have no idea how bad it might get, or you might
Yeah,
not even see it in your area.
yeah. I think that's another thing too. Is a lot of people they glorify like they glorify the violent aspect of the Minuteman side because they're like, oh, it's like Call of Duty or whatever, right? It's just like this internal thing where like men have always romanticized conflict, but the
Hmm.
reality of it, sadly, is it's like, look, right now, I can go out and train all day long, and I can be miserable for a weekend in the woods or do whatever, but I can come home to my heated house, watch Netflix, right? Crack open a beer, get some out of season fruit and some meat from the store, cook dinner, have a great time, or even yet, I can go to a fast food place, get some food, and I can chill, right? And I can live like a normal life, right? Um, all that goes away if any of us ever actually have to do what we're training for, right?
Hmm.
That's the reality of it. Is that the cold, harsh fact and reality is if we are ever in a point in our lives where we actually have to use the knowledge we are trying to gain and actually have to do the stuff we are trying to train for, life is going to get really hard really fast, and that comes with the harsh realities that you might not make it through. You do not have plot armor. You are not the main story, right?
There's no
um
guarantee.
exactly. So I think that's a huge aspect of that. It's like that idea of that community. And I think that for me the biggest thing that I love hearing about this with you saying that is that that's how things used to be. I mean, immediately my mindset kind of went to like pioneer towns, you know, where that's how it was, I mean, like you had an Indian raid and Pa got killed warding off the Comanche. Well, someone's got to step up and step in, and that's the community came together and everybody took part of that. And so I think that's a huge part of that I think is very encouraging to hear from you. And I hope other people listening can kind of learn from some of this. Is that um, I think that that's the biggest aspect of this is even if you have a bunch of dudes and you're not quite sure how to train on the tactical side, I think the community aspect is probably the most important. Is having that network of people who you can rely on because you can learn everything else down the road. You can't really learn community.
Hmm. I think this is a good place to start the conversation about different groups in a that kind of share the same area.
Mm-hmm.
They're all built up of the same community. Um, I've noticed, at least just like looking online, it's really not hard, but a lot of groups are kind of balkanized. Like people are scattered all over the place. A lot of them will, talk shit on each other, like, "Oh, you're wearing belt kit," like like, why don't you own plates? Or like, like, oh, 10-5 AR is completely pointless. Why doesn't everyone in your group run like SPRs?
Or
Like,
even just even not even just gear, but like a lot of times just slightly varying ideology or slightly differing views of organization.
yeah,
You
but let's
know,
be honest, it's mostly gear.
I mean, yeah, I mean that's definitely a part of it. Also, I think like the gear and the financial aspect too. Um, of that, I think sometimes some groups are like they just get maybe intimidated by people who've invested properly into certain amounts of gear, or other people who are they're just like, hey, look, we just don't have a whole lot of money, and we don't like hanging out with these other guys because they're kind of douchey about us not having the latest and greatest, you know.
Mhm.
And it's
And
like,
it, and some guys are still working on their kit too, like,
exactly,
sometimes they buy something new, they want to show it off to get people's opinions, and then you rag on them about something else, like they don't want anything to do with you.
exactly. I think that's a big thing. Is like we're supposed to help build each other up, right? And if your first experience rolling into a group of people who you're still kind of on the fence about is that they all give you crap for your airsoft chest rig because you're new to this, you didn't know the difference between the $60 chest rig and the $160 chest rig, right? And you're like, you show up and everyone just gives you crap the whole time. Not like in a constructive way either, to be like, hey man, like I get it, like that's going to be good for training, but you should probably think about upgrading to something else later down the road. But just being like, oh, look at this poor, blah blah blah. Yeah, like yeah, we all give each other shit. Like that, there's a certain level of that. Have some thick skin, right? But at
What
the
I
same time,
see the sorry,
no, go
what
ahead.
I see the most of when it comes to like taking in new people, or kind of like having a discussion with them as far as like how they set up their kit, is you get a lot of guys still wearing plate carriers, which I'm not saying you shouldn't own a plate carrier. There's a time and place for everything. Um, but like geographically for us at least, and also given our disposition, like we don't have fueled vehicles always waiting for us for transport. Um, Maybe a chest rig would be a better choice for your group, uh, unless you like live in a city. Uh, and some guys don't know. They still got the stuff that they were rocking from like when that was the thing. Like everyone had plate carriers, like in 2016 or a little bit after that.
Well, I think some things too, like they're cyclical. There's certain trends. People are trying to be trendy, or like they just don't know, so they follow what other people do. Like I think of all of the videos on YouTube that all like came out around the same time. It was like, how does a Navy SEAL set up his plate carrier? Look at all my Gucci stuff on my carrier. And it's like, yeah, that's cool and it's entertaining or whatever. And if you want to follow that path, great. But it doesn't always work for everybody. Like I know I post a lot about my belt kit. I've been a huge convert to belt kit for years. I love belt kit. For me, it works. I think it's comfortable. It's relatively light. I can carry a ton of stuff that's not on a plate. And the thing is, if I'm worried about a situation that might involve plates, I can add a plate carrier to belt kit. You know, um, but yeah, I think you bring up an important aspect. So like your environment and your mission dictates your gear, and that what works for one group or one person might not work for the other. You might have a group of people who are like, we're plate carriers, helmets, and battle belts. Sick, sweet. And another group of people who's like, we're boonie hats and belt kit. And be like, hey, instead of fighting each other over who's right, figure out how to work together.
Yeah, and I see a lot of this in our area in particular, because we have like the standing militia, which seems a bit dated. Um, and I know there are some groups kind of breaking off from that. There's also just like dotted small groups all around this area, whether it be north of the state or kind of like the states that we share borders with. Um, I know we don't all agree on the same thing, um, but it all seems kind of like little things.
And I think that's an interesting point to bring up. I want to talk about a little bit is I know I talked about this in my Minuteman diplomacy episode, and we'll kind of revisit this here. When it comes to working with other groups, I think one thing is that it's important to know who else is around you and who else is operating in a similar manner. Like you said, for those who are listening, like, it's no secret that this part of the country is very heavy with official like militias. And there are a couple in the area of varying sizes, as well as, like you said, other similar small groups of like minded individuals. And I think it's one of those things that to learn like what the other groups are, what are they about? Are they of similar ideology or are they different ideologies? Are they a bunch of boomers that are trying to be relevant out there and it's more of a political thing than it is anything else? Like what's the take on the group, right? And then kind of make a mental note of like, are there groups we might be interested in working with? Are there some that we have no interest in working with? Because, for example, let's say if your group is 12, 15 people, that's fantastic. But if it is a situation where like things go south, maybe you need more involvement, or maybe as things kind of calm down and order is slowly reestablished, you need to establish a little bit of diplomacy with other groups, right? Since you're all operating in the same area and you don't want to have issues with each other. So there has to be some certain level of discussion of who are we willing to work with, who are we not, and
Yeah,
where do we draw that line?
yeah. I know one project that my group is kind of working on is wanting to open up diplomacy among all the other groups in this area of North Idaho. Um, because depending on whatever threat we may face, I don't think it'd do anyone good if we were to engage each other rather than kind of be like autonomous with your own group, but acknowledge the other groups in the area and like maybe not have a feud when your family is starving.
Yeah. I use pop culture references a lot because I feel like they're pretty relatable to a lot of people. Are you very familiar with The Walking Dead?
A little bit, yeah.
So I've been getting back into the show recently. I fell off around season 4 and I started watching again. And anyway, what you were saying, it just kind of made me think like, for those who, spoiler alert, if you haven't got that far, um, in the later seasons, they different communities come together to go against Negan and the Saviors. And there's the citizens of Alexandria, Hilltop, the Kingdom, and Oceanside, right? And it's
Mm-hmm.
basically the same thing as what you're talking about, right? 4 different groups of people with different goals, different ideas, um, but with a common enemy, for example. And they had to find ways to compromise and work together and to trust each other, right? And together they were able to come together and get rid of the bad guys. And it's kind of an example, just a cheesy example from a TV show, but like, hey, it doesn't even have to be a Russians falling from the sky situation. It could be something like a humanitarian need or a natural disaster, forest fire, something like that. I think a big aspect of this too, like the whole idea of community, is that we focus a lot on the training side and almost nothing from this space on community involvement. Um, I will say one of the groups I've been a part of in the past, which could be lacking in the training side, huge on community involvement. And I think for me that was a big thing, was that like how much out and about like helping your community do you do, and trying to take care of your community with stuff that doesn't involve you being in kit, whether that be maybe helping somebody out after their house burned down during a fire, maybe that be um, bringing food to the homeless, maybe that be a community project, maybe that be it be something to where you build goodwill and good faith with people in your community.
Mm-hmm.
So they don't, because I think there's a huge thing, like even in this area is a little more friendly to the idea of armed groups of people. But even in this area of the country, there are people who are weary of that, or might think it's kind of weird, or those people are crazy or something like that, right? Well, if you present yourself in a positive way and you're being an active part of your community and doing positive things for your community, it definitely helps that later down the road, when or if people find out that you're one of these dudes that goes out and, LARPs in the woods and trains in the woods, whatever. Because they're like, oh, he's actually like a really good guy. Like he was doing that stuff down the road, or actually helping out his neighbor, or doing this stuff in the community and actually being a part of it. Like, it takes that aspect out where people might look at it and be like, oh, he's kind of a weirdo. And even if they do, they might be like, hey, he's kind of weird, but he's doing all this stuff in the woods. But he is a good guy. He helped us out when we needed it.
I think I definitely agree with going through actions in the community to take away any assumptions that people might have of you. And like now is the time to like shake hands and make friends, not after. I remember in one of your earlier podcasts, you kind of brought up farmers and ranchers, um, and how they're kind of like the lifeblood of this area, which they are. Um, Now would be the time to approach those people because, typically they like to keep to themselves already. Now imagine if the world was going to shit and then you have you and your buddies who are all heavily armed wanting to have a conversation with them like, hey, like me and my guys here who are extremely dangerous, like, we'll protect you if you like maybe feed us. Like, how do you think that's gonna go?
Yeah, exactly. Like, that's what I'm saying is, like, if I walk out, if something goes down, right, and I walk out my street right now and I don't know my neighbors, and I go, all right, community, band together, let's rally the troops and start building the fences. They're going to be like, who the hell are you? Like, why are you giving orders? What are you doing? Uh, I don't know you, right?
Shut
Versus
up!
if you,
I'm gonna protect you whether you like it or not.
yeah, exactly. Respect my authority. But if you have that goodwill and good faith ahead of time, and then you roll in, you're way less likely to have issues. Think about, like, again, going back to pulp culture. Think about literally any movie where it's a disaster and somebody steps up and is like, "We're going to do this." What's the first thing that happens? Someone comes up and goes, "Who are you to tell us what we're going to do? Why should we listen to you?" Right?
Yeah, why can't it be me, the weird guy?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. It's that kind of stuff, right? Where it's like, well, why should we listen to you? It's like, well, if you've built that positive note ahead of time, especially if you live in a smaller community where it's a little bit easier to do that, dude, you save yourself so much time in building of trust. Like you said, like the rancher thing. If you are trying to make connections with people like that, whether it be at church, at school, at work, whatever, all of those connections and networking go way further now than they would to try to build that later. Because, like you said, if you roll up with you and the Goon Boys and you're like, hey, we're all tacked out, and, could you give us a half a beef and we'll keep your family safe? Sounds a lot more like extortion than a deal.
Exactly. And like sometimes they don't want anything to do with you, which is fine, but it's like you should have that conversation now, not later.
Absolutely, especially if you have like the mentality, like, oh, why would they turn us away? They would absolutely be, predispositioned to be friendly with us, right? And then you go out there and they're like, I want nothing to do with you. You're like, crap, now what? You know? One of the things I think about, prime example of that, is like anytime like an unconstitutional law like was going to get passed back when I lived in Washington. I had a buddy of mine who was always like, oh, they can't do that. That's against the Constitution. And it's like, you're predisposition to the idea that they care, or the idea that they're going to abide by that, right, means that you've already lost. Because you don't understand the people you're dealing with, right? And in the same way, like, if you have this idea that, like, oh, well, people will just act this way when things go south in a situation I've never been in, and so I am just going to assume how people would react based on stereotypical features of the area,
Hmm.
you're screwed.
And what we're trying to do with the community isn't just like with farmers and people who are trying to rebuild or be self-sufficient, but all these other gun guys or prepper groups, whatever you want to call it, we're all part of the same community. So like we want to try and make it to where we can shake hands with the other groups. Because right now it's kind of like, oh, well, you don't like how I do things and you called me gay on the internet. So like if I see you during XYZ, I'll probably just shoot you. It's like
Right.
that doesn't help anyone.
I mean, think of it this way as a different comparison, right? Like we saw with the whole Texas border wall thing, we had 25 governors, at least verbally anyway, support and be like, "Hey, we're with you," right? So
Mm-hmm.
break that down to a smaller scale. Let's assume there's some kind of so that's like a national crisis that everyone joined together for. So now let's say there's a crisis local to your area. It's in a situation where we have to start using our Minuteman type training that we were putting into this. So some things have gone wrong. It's a whole lot easier, in my opinion, to be like, hey, these are groups we're willing to work with, or these are groups we're at least willing to temporarily put our differences aside, come together, and work together to establish a common goal. Now, part of that, though, to keep in mind, is it's not going to be like the movies where it's like, hey, I got 8 random groups of people that, we went on our little montage side quest to go talk to the leaders of each group. And now we're all rallied together to, to defend against the orcs invading. Um, if you just grab 8 random groups of people, but you have no idea how they train together and you've never dealt with them in that aspect, now you have 8 random chains of command with 8 random ways of training and skill levels that are trying to operate by one SOP with zero integration.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a thing too to where like I think it might benefit sometimes to where again, you don't want to give away everything, but maybe it might be worth it to have like, hey, we're gonna have a meetup at this place and we're gonna do kind of like a joint training exercise. But we're gonna do it relatively basic. We're gonna do some basic level stuff that's not giving away anything secret, right?
Mm-hmm.
Pick their brain, they can pick our brain, vice versa. They can scout us, we can scout them, we can work together. If we like each other, great. If not, we learn something out of it. Cool. We've got a network, we've got someone that we know. Maybe we do this once every so often, make a little barbecue out of it or something. But you get to kind of know each other as well with other groups. And who knows? Maybe you guys are just like, hey, we're just going 2 different paths, and like you guys are cool dudes. It's just not our thing. No problem. Sweet. Shake hands. Have a good time. If you ever want to come train with us, or vice versa, like maybe we should do this again sometime. Cool. And maybe best case scenario, you get out there and you're like, wow, you guys are exactly what we're looking for. Maybe we should join together. And then boom, now your group just doubled in size. Um, there's positives and negatives that come out of that. And so it's worth weighing the risk, in my opinion.
Yeah. And we've had experiences with you know, there'll be groups out there that'll say something about the other, whether it be true or not, um, to try and like influence how other people might see them. I know that's kind of something going on right now, and that's kind of what is driving us to try and like get the groups to meet and have a discussion, just so that your opinion of other people isn't just word of mouth. Um, because I know we've taken in several members from other groups just because they spoke a big game, but they really didn't practice what they preached. And like either we came across them just by chance, or they heard about us through something else. They came and trained with us, and now they're like a regular.
Well, and see, and that's an awesome thing too. And I can see, I know I've been again getting into the weeds a little bit here. I think some of the some of the bitchiest people I think I know are dudes in this community of
Oh,
the
I know.
thing. Some of the most like the people that would have people like people's drama that would rival that of like a high school 14-year-old in a major movie kind of thing are in this type of community because I've seen groups where it's like a guy trains with one group for a while and then for one reason he leaves and goes and gets with another group, and now group A hates group B because they think they're scalping people.
Mhm.
from them. And it's like, dude, that's not what this is. It's like for one reason or another, he just wasn't into it, and or things like that, where it's just people get so much drama and there's so many headstrong personalities and everyone's trying to be an alpha. And so people are just butting heads and it can get really annoying. I know I had a group of I was a part of a group at one point in time that we were training with some guys from a different group. And on paper, these guys seemed really squared away and really awesome. And we're like, cool, it'd be great to go train with these guys. And then we met them and we're like, dude, these fuck sticks can't tie their own shoes. Like, want anything to do with these guys. You know what I mean? Like on paper, they looked great. On social media, they looked great. And it was like one of our guys was friends with someone else in their group and was like, hey, let's meet up, dude. And like we go out there and we're like, I never want to see these guys again. So there's pros and cons, with that. But again, I think it's important to reach out because we never would have known that had we not done it ahead of time. And luckily we did it when it wasn't a life threatening situation. Can you imagine like going out there and being like, oh, you guys are squared away. Like my buddy says you guys are sick. Like we're going to go do this thing together. And then you get out there and you're like, holy crap, we're all going to die.
Like, bro, turn off your headlamp. What are you doing?
Yeah. I mean, like prime example, like that someone in that group, and I won't say who the group was,
Mhm.
the way that their group operated. So our group was like, look, we're a group of like-minded individuals who are just going to go train and do stuff on our own because we have every right to. This person apparently, in Washington State, like a lot of states, they have state militias and militia clauses or whatever, right? And so he was making everyone that joined their group sign up with the sheriff as part of like the official militia. Like I guess there's like regulations or like there's a way to like register as a member of the militia,
Yeah.
like in the books. And he was having his people do this because in his head, the law technically said the sheriff has the capability to call up the militia in a time of emergency. And I'm like, you are retarded. At the time, I was like, it was like 2018. I was like, if you think in 2018 that any law enforcement body in the United States is going to be like, oh, a bunch of random dudes wearing M81 that I've done zero things with, I'll call them up in case of crime or emergency. If you think that's actually going to happen, you're retarded. And he was like adamant about it, and it was things like that where I'm like, I don't think I really want to be associated with you. If this is the kind of thing that you're doing, if your way of thinking is this far off from reality, I don't think you're a good person to train with. And that was our first interaction with these guys, and it was our last interaction with these guys because like everyone in the group was like just so hell bent on this, and we were like, no, I don't think we can hang out here.
Well, that's a flaw I kind of see in a lot of militias nowadays is they really want that sense of authority and legitimacy. And I honestly think that kind of works against what a lot of people in doing this sort of lifestyle is about. Um, like me and my group, we don't do this because we want to be some ruling authority. We just want to make sure people still have open trade and stability in the area and keep it from plunging into total anarchy for whatever may happen.
Right. Well, it's like the idea, and this might sound kind of cringe, but like the idea of the citizen soldier, right? The idea of that you are protecting your community, right? That you're a defender of your community because you're also a part of your community and all the things that that entails, including like, hey, in case of time or disaster, like let's be real. I'm looking at it this way. Where we're located at, right, is a fairly rural part of the area, right?
Mm-hmm.
If anything is going to happen, that's a disaster. Resources are going to go to a more populated area first. They're probably going to go to Spokane first, right? So they're going to go to a major city before they go to us. They're going to go to some of the larger cities in our area before they go to us. So somebody in the meantime has to keep things running with whatever that means, right?
Mm-hmm.
Whether that means helping rebuild stuff, whether that means security, whatever, right? And because we're a part of the community, we want to see the community thrive. So if that means we got to step into that role and do that, then that's what we got to do. Because long story short, if you don't, who's putting food on the table? Who's keeping the lights on, so to speak? And that's where I think a big part of this is like, if you're doing this stuff to be a petty warlord, stop. If you're doing this stuff because you want to be look cool on Instagram, whatever. That's your own prerogative. But and my idea of like the perfect world, you should be doing this because you believe in your community, you believe in the people around you, and that, in my opinion, like that's what America's is. It's that idea of taking ownership of your community and the defense of the community and the livelihood of the community, and making sure that it stays operating and it stays free and it stays, it stays America.
Right. And also just how like each state is supposed to like represent and operate itself for its people and not outside interests.
Right. No, I agree. I think it's in that at every level, right? So taking it down even further from that, from the state to the county to the city, like the idea of personal independence and personal freedom really comes down to the idea of taking ownership and responsibility with that. Like this idea that freedom has zero responsibility attached to it is part of the reason why we're in the boat that we're in today. Freedom comes with a cost, and that doesn't necessarily mean having to die overseas in a desert for 20 years. That means that cost of that freedom is personal responsibility and sacrificing a little bit of your time and money to ensure that you can maintain that freedom. Thanks for listening, everybody. This has been another episode of Mid-Tier Thoughts. This is going to be a part one of a two-part episode with this guy. So he's been a really great guy, and we've got a lot of more information to cover. Stay posted for episode 2 coming out soon, within the next couple of days after I get done editing it. Again, a little backstory. This is a guy who, in a local group, who's been doing stuff for a little while, just a different bit of perspective, and someone with experience of being involved in the group and some of the harsh realities that come with that group, and things to kind of give advice to people who are getting started and for people who may already be in a group. That being said, make sure that you subscribe to our YouTube at Mid-Tier Thoughts. Make sure you check out the socials we'll have posted in the description below, as well as check out the merch store, www.midtierthoughts.com. We've got some awesome, cool t-shirt designs. Going to be dropping some more soon. So with that being said, thank you guys, everyone, for coming in, and we will see you in part 2.